Hello everyone and welcome to Insights for Leaders. I'm Anna Purchas, London Office Senior Partner at KPMG, and I'll be your host today. And our topic today is artificial intelligence. There are already many companies using AI to analyse and act on data, for example, to automate processes, to prevent fraud and to develop new smart products. But AI is developing fast, and the news is currently all about ChatGPT and other generative AI, which can write your blog post, draft your proposal, and even help you create prize-winning art. It's opening up a whole world of opportunity to drive efficiencies and cost savings and generate new revenue. And that's never been more important at a time when the cost of business is going up, while for some, demand is faltering. Now, of course, where there's opportunity, there's also risk. We've had warnings that we're moving too fast, that AI could outsmart us, and that generative AI could wreak havoc in the wrong hands. But despite the risks, can we afford not to push ahead with AI if we're going to tackle the big economic, social, and environmental issues we face today? Can any business succeed without it? We'll be aiming to answer those questions today, and we'll be looking at how business leaders can push ahead with emerging tech in a safe way. To help me with that, I'm joined by a great lineup of guests. Victoria Edwards, CEO and co-founder of Fido Tech, will explain how her company is using AI to tackle water scarcity, giving us the startup's view on innovation and sharing her views on the role of data. Nick Hederman, Senior Director, Modern Work, Microsoft UK, will share his insights on how generative AI can be used to improve the employee experience and engagement. Ian West, UK Head of Alliances and Head of Telecoms, Media and Technology Sector, KPMG in the UK, will give us his views on the pros and cons of AI and share what we're seeing from our clients. And Henry Smith, Associate Director, Economics, KPMG in the UK, will provide his thoughts on regulation in AI and digital markets. We'll be giving you the chance to put your questions to our guests during our Q&A session, so please share them with us in our chat box on the right of your screen. And we'll be asking you to get involved through our usual poll questions. If you aren't familiar with the SpotMe platform, please check the chat box for our top tips on how to get the best out of this event. Right, let's get started by welcoming our first guest, Victoria. Thanks for joining us today. Victoria, perhaps you could start by telling our audience a little bit about Fido Tech and in particular how you're using AI.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Anna. We're here to save the planet, to create a world without water scarcity. Water is the world's most precious resource, and yet we're facing day zero. Not net zero, day zero. That is the day we turn on the tap and there will be no water. It's happened in Johannesburg in 2018, Birmingham, Mississippi in the US this year. It's even happened, albeit briefly, in the UK. Now, without water, we do not stand a chance of having transformational technology that will help us stave and mitigate climate change. Water is climate change. So Fido Tech saw that as a problem statement and said, AI is one of the ways that we can help solve this. Because I work in an industry where we should all get the sack. Right? The water industry produces a product and then loses 30, 40, 50, even 60% of the clean water they produce. And they do that through leaking pipes. So Fido AI was invented to be able, and pipes are noisy environments. It can take any audio file, any noise from a water pipe or the outside of a water pipe anywhere in the world on any material and tell you if it's a leak or not. And often it's usage, it's rainwater, it's a tram going overhead. We've even had camels that sound like they're making these noises. And most importantly, Fido AI can then tell you the size of the leak because you only want to dig the big ones. The small ones, you don't. It's not economic, it's not environmentally friendly when we talk about the economic cost of leakage. There is no other industry in the world that would produce something. Can you imagine BMW producing 100 cars, then burning 40 of them on the forecourt before they even got to their end client? So water is where it's at, and our AI has been designed to be completely sensor and platform agnostic, completely non-proprietary. It's made us highly unpopular with the industry that's used to buying expensive kit and having men and women with listening sticks walking down the road like the Romans. But they never solved the challenge. We have 7 years before demand outstrips supply by 40%. It is where it needs to be, and it's only by using and harnessing the powers of AI that we're going to really solve this challenge.
It's a really great example of how AI is making a huge positive difference. Now, we had a really interesting discussion the other day about the role of data in all of this. So, because I know this will get a reaction from you, I'm going to ask, do organisations need more data to realise the benefits of AI?
No. And in fact, data for data's sake is absolutely the wrong way to go. So what does AI do? It's not here to take people's jobs. It's not here. It is just an extension. So I see it as an extension of what we started with, the abacus. We moved to the calculator quite comfortably. We then moved to spreadsheets. They all still require human input, so we still get errors. We know that, we're getting cells and formulas wrong. AI is just the next step where it removes that ability for human error at the point of input, and it gives you an outcome. So AI, in terms of data, is only useful if it's actionable data. We don't need data for data's sake. We don't need a myriad of shiny new platforms that then still a human goes, "Ooh, not sure if it's right. Let me just check this next bit of data. I'm not sure." The usefulness of AI is it gives you clear action with consistency, with repetitiveness, allowing humans to go and do the more complex and act on the data that they're given. But just more data, unless you verify it, in fact, I'd scrap it. Find out what you need, what you want to learn from it, what action it wants to tell you. What you want AI to do is to tell you what to do next, but also the consequence of not doing it. So the human understands the decision that they're then going to make, whether they follow it.
That's really clear. Now, your business, Fido Tech, was the winner of our UK Tech Innovator of the Year competition in 2021. So what advice can you give to other startups on how they can overcome the challenges they face and pitch themselves to investors?
Well, firstly, obviously enter the next round. It's now gone global, and I think you've had some great winners. To pitch to investors, like our technology, we are highly disruptive, and we sort of didn't follow the rule book, because you get set on this path. It's got to be seed, then Series A, then Series B, and we went, I don't know how that operates, haven't got time for that. We're trying to save the planet, create a world without water scarcity, and we found some fantastic investors. And I think what you need to show is, investors always tell us that they invest in tech, talent and traction. So if you have that real belief, that's what gets you up in the morning, you've got that vision, you've got the strategy, and you have a means to get there, then investors will follow you. But I will say to any startup, and I now like to refer to it as a scale-up, startup investment is not just about the money. And we were really lucky with Emerald Ventures and the Ski On Water that we found investors that believe in what we're trying to achieve, which is to create a world without water scarcity by being disruptive, by being non-proprietary. And that is an important angle, because that's a relationship that's going to be your strongest outside your family that you will have for the next however many years. So think carefully.
And conversely, what would you say to an established business looking to work with a startup or a scale-up? How can they make the relationship work?
It's about a dance, Anna. You have to, we were lucky to win a place on the United Utilities Innovation Lab, and we wouldn't be here without it. You have to dance with each other and build that trust and honesty. And every startup will say they can do more than they can, because they're already ahead in their head, in their vision. But you have to be honest on both sides. What are the problem you're trying to achieve? So the larger company has to say, this is where I think there's a market need, or this is where a problem we can solve. And the startup has to be allowed to fail, and fail repeatedly, and learn from that. And I think what the corporations do, and the larger businesses, is give access, give ability to scale, and give that right framework. So don't, please, if you are a company of a big size, see some great technology and say, great, we go to our innovation department, and the innovation department goes, great, and you go down this little cul-de-sac, but can we have 3 reference clients? Great technology can come at you, take advantage of it, but appreciate the young company will be agile, but it also needs help and expertise in how to take something and prioritise and grow.
Thanks, Victoria. There's lots of things for our audience to think about there. Please do share any questions you have for Victoria in the chat box on the right of your screen. Now it's time for our first poll question. Here it is. Are you planning to use generative AI within your organisation in some capacity? The answers we're giving you, we're already using it. We'll be using it in the next 6 months. we'll be using it in the next 2 years, or we're not interested. We'll take a look at your responses later. But first, let's bring in Nick Hederman from Microsoft. Great to have you with us today.
Nice to see you, Anna.
Nick, we're hearing a lot about generative AI and ChatGPT. Could you start by explaining exactly what generative AI is and why it's different to what we've seen before?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the concept of AI is not a new term. It was coined back in the 1950s when scientists first asked the question, could a machine replicate human intelligence? And so many things have happened since then. We've seen some massive strides forwards. Perhaps prior to this current era of generative AI, massive changes and impact in the field of machine learning. And in fact, Anna, in your opening, you gave some great examples of where AI is currently automating existing industries or processes. But what's different about this new era is really essentially these large language models like ChatGPT, built and created by OpenAI, which is bringing a whole new way of humans interacting with the technology. It's trained on huge amounts of publicly available data, what ChatGPT specifically is, and as a consequence of that, really helping people to get a step up, to get ahead on things they're trying to do, whether that's creating some content, written content, or in the case of DALL-E 2, which is another of OpenAI's model, generate an image. And that's a great starting point to help augment and support people in whatever they're trying to get done.
Great, thanks, Nick. I think a lot of our listeners will be thinking through how they can use generative AI within their businesses, but will probably be a little tentative about the risks. So how can they adopt this tech and give their employees a ChatGPT-like experience in a way that's secure and compliant?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is the critical question for every business leader right now. ChatGPT is publicly available on the internet, just like we've integrated it into the Bing search engine as well. And that's great if you're a consumer or if you're doing low risk items. But for the vast majority of organizations working on sensitive and company confidential information, that needs to remain within the company, remain within the firewall, so to speak, of the organization. And that's where we think Microsoft will play a critical role. We announced just recently something called M365 Copilot. This is a new Copilot technology. You'll see that term Copilot from Microsoft a lot because we believe very much in helping and augmenting and supporting humans in their day-to-day. We have Copilots for security. We have Copilots for developers. In fact, GitHub Copilot has been around for the longest. But the most exciting one, I think, because the technologies are so democratized within organizations, is the M365 Copilot capability, because it shows up in things like Excel, Word, PowerPoint, Outlooks, applications that the vast majority of day-to-day office users are used to using. And so with that in mind, with Copilot showing up in those familiar places, leaders can have the confidence that it's being trained on your information within your tenant. And as a consequence of that, it adheres to all of your security policies or your compliance policies or your privacy policies. And equally, Microsoft has built that capability and technology with our own responsible AI principles in mind. And so just like any other technology from Microsoft, you can control, you could administer, and you can have the confidence and trust in the technology as you would any other thing that we would build and supply to an organization.
Thanks, Nick. That sounds really reassuring. Final question for now, Nick, and it's a bit of a double header. What does the future of work really look like? And what should or can our viewers be doing now to get ready, especially given the uncertain economic situation we're in?
Yeah, it's a great question, Anna. And in fact, let me just answer that with sort of two themes. The first one has come clearly out of the pandemic, and that's this desire for more flexibility. And we've been on the journey essentially since 2020 to figure out how to offer more flexibility. And so advice for any leader on this call is making sure that you're embracing this new era of flexibility and having the tools and the digital capabilities to enable that within your organization. How do you create a sense of mission and purpose? How do you align people to goals? How do you help people learn in the moment and share information and get insight as to what's happening? And so having a really strong digital fabric to support this new era of flexibility, absolutely critical. But then back to this topic of AI and AI to augment the way in which we do work, getting ready for that is absolutely critical. And the technology is coming quick. So leaders need to really start thinking about this now. We see in the data that people are frustrated with their jobs. They're spending far too much time searching for information. We saw in our latest study that 64% of employees just don't feel like they've got the energy to be innovative or creative. So the technology with generative AI is coming to help remove that drudgery and that mundaneness from your day-to-day work. But in order to get the most out of it, you've got to think about how to guide it responsibly within your organization and create the aptitude within your people to get the most out of it. Critically thinking about where that source of information is coming from, even thinking about biases and being able to examine biases in the data, right the way down to what we sort of would loosely term prompt engineering. A good prompt into something like Copilot will get you a better outcome. So knowing how to write and interact with the models is absolutely critical. So these are all new skills that 82% of leaders, by the way, in our recent survey agreed they need to start teaching, and the time is now.
New skills indeed, and you're advocating moving at pace. We'll get the results of our survey in a moment and see if the businesses listening agree with you. But in the meantime, if you have a question for Nick, please share it in the chat box on the right of your screen, and we'll try to get to it in our Q&A today. So before we go to our next list, let's take a look at the results of our first poll. Are you planning to use generative AI within your organisation in some capacity? So the answers, we're already using it, coming in at 24%. We'll be using it in the next 6 months, 22%. We'll be using it in the next 2 years, quite far out, 40%. And 14% of the people with us today are saying they're not interested. Now, I'm going to come to you in a moment, Nick. Victoria, what do you make of those results?
I think the 2 years we're sitting on the fence. It's probably because it's a lot of new terminology, and we have to be careful. It's not emperor new clothes syndrome that we've all rushed to the bright shiny new thing. And I think it's a language and narrative, and I think Nick put it very clearly, that we need to understand about the power of generative AI, that it's actually there to remove that drudgery, to give confidence about the action that we need as humans to take. And it's how we understand that and put it into our business. So we will very much be taking our AI, which was based, we talk about veracity of data. That's absolutely the key. We build our AI model on what is an absolute truth. There's only one absolute truth, is that you've dug a hole and found a leak, or you've dug a hole and you haven't. And we put nothing into our training library except something that's been verified. So learning how to use generative AI is really, really important to get the most out of it. But do not be frightened of it, but be aware that it's got the power of a Ferrari. So unless you've only ever been used to driving a Mini, it's going to take a bit of time and you're going to stall the engine. But it's worth persevering with, driving it correctly, and you'll reap so many more benefits from it. So congratulations to everybody, that 24% that are already using it.
Thank you. And Nick, coming to you on those poll results, do they surprise you? What do you think?
Well, look, I think I'm not surprised that people are using it today. And just to be clear, the M365 Copilot that I talked about isn't available yet, publicly available in the market. We're still in the early access preview stages. So I could imagine a lot of leaders are waiting for that type of technology to be available to then deploy it securely and compliantly within their organization. So it equally doesn't surprise me that people are looking for the next 6 months, even in a couple of years. But that being said, I think we all agree the technology is incredible. The pace at which people have figured out how to use ChatGPT on the web is immense, and many people right now are using it all around the world. And I think, quite honestly, people will look for it from their employer to help them in their day-to-day. And those organizations that aren't offering it perhaps will find it harder to attract and retain talent. It's going to be there to support and augment. I'll give you a personal example. I'm very lucky and privileged to be using it right now within Microsoft. I was half an hour late to a meeting last week because I was meeting with a customer. There were a bunch of people on that call. I just asked my Copilot to recap the meeting. And I tell you what, the recap was insanely helpful, and it took 2 seconds. And I read it very quickly because it was nicely summarized. And then I instantly knew what the last half an hour was about. And then I was able to actively participate in the second half. And so what a powerful tool to have. Also, the actions were very clear, and there were some of those actions that included ones for me as well. So I felt very included in that moment. So I think once you've experienced that sort of capability and support in your day-to-day job, you're going to want it. And if the organization is not supplying it, then I think it's going to be a tough time for those that don't have it.
I can see that. Thank you. Ian, your thoughts on that poll result?
Yeah, I was slightly surprised actually to see that it was around about half of people were looking at it 2 years out or not interested at all. I was slightly surprised when I saw that, but then I do think you've got to understand that I think people have been stung a little bit by metaverse. You know, there's a lot of hype. Last year, metaverse was the big word. It was all going to be about the metaverse, and AI was quite quiet. And of course, for various reasons, it may come back. It may be very important in the future, but there's a lot less noise about metaverse at the moment. So I wonder if people just feel a little bit stung by some of the emerging technologies and are holding back to really see what comes of them before they jump in.
Good point. Let's stay with you now, Ian. We've heard lots of positive stuff about AI from Victoria and Nick. So, is AI a force for good in business? What do you see as the pros and cons?
Well, I'm head of technology sector for KPMG, so I have to say yes. I've got no choice, right? I have to be positive about it. But in all seriousness, it is a yes. I think it's a yes, but it depends for some clients, some organisations. So it will depend on the fact pattern of your organisation at the moment. It'll depend on the sector in which you sit. And it will depend on whether that sector in your business model is easy to disintermediate through new generative AI type technologies. So there's a bit of a yes, it's exciting, but just be careful. It depends. Standing back for a second though and thinking about business generally per your question, I mean, the pros I think fall into a couple of boxes. One is around cost optimization, which is a very obvious one and very here and now. The other is around finding fantastically exciting super new revenue streams that we've talked about before. I think on the cost side, the obvious areas, things like frontline customer services, where call centres are perhaps being automated through generative AI. That's fantastic, it can reduce costs. But at the same time, to some of the comments that were made before by Nick, we have to think about the workforce, the employees. You know, so what about the anxiety and the mental well-being for those individuals when they're opening a newspaper or a website every day and they're saying AI is going to steal your job? That's quite uncomfortable, right? So I think it's about augmenting staff such they can do the more exciting stuff. That will take cost out of the business. And on the revenue generation side, I mean, the world's your oyster. We don't even know the problems yet that the world might face that generative AI could fix in the future. And we have to remember that the AI is really in its baby state at the moment. It really is. We're all excited about it because it's very shiny. It's very impressive in terms of what it can do. But actually, it can get so much smarter and solve all sorts of problems and create all sorts of opportunities for business. Of course, again, I come back to the point though, if you're a sitting duck, if you're there happy with your business model and think everything's okay, someone could use generative AI to wipe out your business. And certainly over the last few weeks, in a certain section, I think of higher education, certain stocks were hit quite hard because, and it may be right, it may be wrong, but investors perceive that the generative AI can do the same as they can, but for free. So I think there's definite pros and cons of business. Overall, I would sit on the side that though it is definitely a positive.
And it is early days, as you said. What are you actually seeing in practice? How are our clients using generative AI?
Well, it's a good question. I think if I think back to the conversations I've had with clients recently, I think it's simplistic, but I'll bucket people into three areas. So one is clients who are saying, oh yeah, we've had lots of conversations about it. My goodness, we've had so many meetings about it. Haven't really done anything yet though. You know, but we really probably should. We really probably should do something about this. And then there's those that have started proof of concepts or pilots. And those are well underway and they're playing at it. They're trying different things before they expand and spend more money. And then there are those, and we saw, was it 20% on the survey, I think, that are absolutely 2 feet in. They've done the pilots, they've introduced it into their business as usual now. They're using it day to day. I think of something I saw recently, I think it was Greg Jackson, CEO of Octopus Energy, talked about how he had the AI undertaking 250 call centre roles. And he was at pains to say, though, that this wasn't meaning he was going to let go of people. He was actually redeploying them into the more interesting jobs. The feedback he had was that customers were happier with the responses they were getting from the AI compared to that which they got from humans before. And I found that quite interesting because in KPMG, we did a survey just in the last 2 weeks. We surveyed around 3,000 people to ask them about their use, or their interest in using AI in terms of customer interaction. And 55% still said they much prefer to deal with a human being. So Greg's obviously got some secret sauce there, which is wonderful, but I think there is horses for courses here. Some consumers in some markets are happier with humans and others perhaps happier working with an efficient AI. But I am making it sound like it's all about customer service, and it's not. As the point was made earlier by Nick, it's absolutely about taking out the more mundane tasks from all sorts of jobs. I'm seeing my clients in areas like legal, accounting, finance, digital ad agencies and media, taking away some of the more mundane activities such that the human can be augmented to do the fun, the developmental, the enjoyable stuff in their day-to-day roles. And also, if anyone has any sense that we might lose lots of jobs, and there's a lot of noise about that on the internet at the moment, jobs are springing up all the time, new jobs to augment content, to, AI ethics advisors, AI auditors and so forth. So new roles are springing up all the time to replace those that may eventually be lost.
Super interesting. I think many business leaders will be looking for guidelines on how they can use generative AI safely. And part of that is, as you've just said, around ethics. So what's your advice to our viewers on how they can address the ethical challenges around ChatGPT?
Well, it's a good question. I'm sure there's a very complicated answer, but from a simple perspective, I'd say, first of all, there are laws in this country, there are rules and regulations, and I know it's a statement of the obvious, but just because it's an emerging tech that seems to know no geographical boundaries, you still have to adhere to the laws of the country. I'm thinking about privacy, I'm thinking about GDPR. So first of all, there are certain rules you have to adhere to anyway, to given. But secondly, I'd say, think about the values of your business. So as you're starting to experiment and come up with new ideas and proof of concepts, how does that sit with the values that you have in with your business? If it aligns well, fantastic, please go ahead. But that's a real barometer for you to test it against. And the third thing I'd say is, and then test these proof of concepts, the ideas, the ways in which you're going to deploy generative AI with your employees, with your clients. Test it with them first, get their sense. Does this feel right in my gut? This is the right thing to do? Or are you putting profit over ethics?
So values and purpose, something that many of us considered so hard as we were going through COVID in terms of how we managed our workforce. Refer back to those values and your purpose when you're considering
Definitely.
AI. Thank you. So final question, and we've got Nick's view on this earlier. From your viewpoint, Ian, how can business leaders get started and accelerate adoption of AI?
Well, I might say, yeah, we have got Microsoft here, and so talk to Microsoft. As the BBC would say, other brands are available, so there's lots of other organisations you can talk to as well, of course. But I would say start off small. Do not throw a lot of money at this. Don't have tech FOMO, technology fear of missing out, and throw lots of money at it just because your competitors are. Think carefully about the ways in which you can deploy this, right? And to do that, speak to KPMG, speak to anyone on the panel or Microsoft or advisors, speak to peer organisations, speak to your staff, get ideas about how this could be deployed. Some of my clients, for example, have conducted crowdsourcing activities with their employees to gather together ideas from the front line as to how AI could prove benefit, and then they filter them down, almost like a Dragon's Den type activity, to work out where they should play. But do speak to a lot of organisations, and I think the point was made before about how impenetrable, impenetrable some large organisations can be to smaller tech businesses. You've got to find a way to open the door to these small tech businesses that will bring you ideas around AI to work with you. Very difficult when you've got big, powerful procurement departments and so on. So find a way to embrace small and nimble startups and work with them.
I love that point. Thanks, Ian. Now it's time for another poll question. And this time we'd like to know, are you concerned that someone could use generative AI to disrupt your business model? Very simple, yes or no. Let's meet our final guest. Henry, great to have you here. There are clearly some concerns about the adoption of AI, and I wanted to explore with you how governments are responding to that. Just last week, the European Parliament was voting on amendments to the EU's legislation on AI, so perhaps we could start there. What's in the EU legislation and how does it impact UK organisations?
Thanks, Anna. And yes, you're right. The EU has very much led from the front on this particular subject, and they've already set out detailed proposals with regards to how they plan to regulate AI. Essentially, what they've adopted is a risk-based approach where they've categorized different AI-led activities based on their risk profile. So they've identified certain practices which they plan to prohibit, so things like biometric surveillance, predictive policing tactics, and some social scoring approaches that governments might choose in other countries to adopt. But that's probably less relevant to our clients. I think our clients will be more interested in the higher risk areas that the EU identified. So they've identified certain sectors such as employment, education, critical infrastructure, where they're concerned that the use of AI could have some detrimental effect on consumers. So where providers of AI operate in those areas, they'll have to comply with a range of obligations, starting off with registering your AI system in the EU, and also having to comply with technical documentation requirements, so setting out exactly how the AI system operates. They'll have to comply with data management requirements. So to your point earlier, Victoria, they'll have to ensure that all the data that they rely upon in order to produce output is relevant for the purposes that it was collected. And they'll also need to embed a level of human oversight into the design of the AI system. So there are a range of obligations that AI providers will need to comply with. The recent amendments that you just referred to have also captured the use of generative AI, and so there'll be some new additional requirements on those providers. So they'll need to ensure that safeguards are embedded into the design of the AI systems. They'll also need to provide a summary of all the copyright material that they've relied upon in order to produce responses. And they'll also need to ensure that there's a sufficient level of transparency so that users that are interacting with their system know that they're interacting with a chat box or an AI system. In terms of what that means for UK-based businesses, well, just because businesses might be based here doesn't mean they can avoid many of these requirements. If you provide an AI system that is operated in the EU, you will also be subject to these regulations. So they're very broad in scope, and there is the possibility for there to be very significant financial penalties associated with non-compliance. So firms that intend to use or provide AI systems should pay close attention to those regulatory developments.
Thanks. That's a full briefing on what's coming from the EU. Can we expect to see similar measures in the UK?
Well, the short answer is no, but there is nuance to that. So the government has planned or announced its intention not to legislate in this area currently. However, in its white paper that it published a couple of months ago, it acknowledged a number of risks associated with the use of AI, and they've called upon regulators and other public bodies to issue guidance with regards to how AI systems should interact with their areas of focus. So, for instance, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission has issued guidance with regards to how AI systems should accommodate or make provisions to avoid discriminatory outcomes. The ICO, so the Information Commissioner's Office, has also issued guidance with regards to the use of AI and its implications for privacy. And going to your point earlier, Ian, we saw the Italian Data Protection Office temporarily ban ChatGPT in Italy because there were concerns associated with the use of personal data in the results. And then finally, the CMA has also announced a review into the use of AI systems and the impact it has on consumer protection and competition more generally. So concerns with regards to the possibility of AI systems exploiting customer vulnerabilities, facilitating collusion, and more generally about the state of competition between different generative AI models and the extent to which there's a risk that existing models could entrench the position of the largest online platforms. So as you can tell, there's many issues and considerations that UK businesses should give consideration to, and that's even before the government plans to legislate in this area.
That is a full list. Are there any other regulations or guidelines that our listeners should be getting up to speed with that will impact what they do with AI or other emerging tech?
Yes, very much so. So online safety and digital competition regulations have been a key area of focus for both the EU and the UK, and there's scope for those regulations overlapping with AI systems. So if I give you an example, the Digital Services Act and the Online Safety Bill here in the UK will impose new restrictions or requirements on businesses with regards to how content is moderated on their platforms. And given the amount of user-generated content available on social media platforms, for instance, you would imagine that that would necessitate a certain level of automation or AI-enabled content moderation rather than expecting humans to be able to carry out those types of activities. Similarly, those regulations and the Digital Markets Act as well will impose restrictions on how results are presented to users, which will influence their choices and the design of information and user interfaces. And similarly, there are ways in which AI could either facilitate or prevent certain nefarious or unhelpful tactics being adopted by those online platforms. So there are lots of ways in which AI will indirectly and directly affect those upcoming pieces of regulations.
Thanks, Henry. We'll hear from you again shortly in our Q&A. But before we go to that, let's take a look at the results of our second poll question. So we asked, are you concerned that someone could use generative AI to disrupt your business model? Wow, 72% of people saying yes, 28% saying confidently no. Victoria, let's come to you first. What do you think to those answers?
I think it's all around narrative and the use of language. AI is actually it's a dirty word now, isn't it? It's one that everybody's afraid of, because we haven't really explained what AI can do. And I think if you think it's going to disrupt your model, so we are a tech company built on AI, and we'll definitely be working with generative AI and open GPT to enhance what we're doing. But our core values are we're brave, we're curious, we're all in, and we leave no one behind. And that leave no one behind that's how I think AI is enabling people around the world to take advantage. So I think if you've got a business model and you're worried, you have to say, what are you actually delivering? What are you worried that generative AI can take away that means your end client won't want to use you anymore or won't want to use your service in the same time? But on the same page, you should absolutely be saying, what causes me the most management time or problem time that I get repetitively day in, day out, that isn't enhancing the business, but it's taking up people's time and people's energy? And that should go in it's like a boyfriend list, pros, cons, right? And you have pros and cons, and that's in your pro list to say, can generative AI actually reduce or remove that repetitive problem so I can then push my business forward and carry on delivering what is my USP to my client? So it's not all doom and gloom, but it's having a very honest where your weaknesses are. I think what it does, it shines a spotlight on businesses to say, actually, do we have a weakness? Are we open to whether it's generative AI as competition or somebody else coming into the market, disruptor, not with AI as competition, and try and lock that down. But at the same time, let's get rid of those drudgery problems that we have on a daily basis that generative AI can help to remove.
Thank you. Nick, do you have a view on our poll results that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, similar to the previous comments, to be honest. When we asked leaders what do we think is the most interesting thing that can come from this technology, the first thing and the most common thing they said was increasing employee productivity. And so if you think about this technology taking away the mundane tasks, taking away the admin and the analytical work that can take up hours of an individual's time and freeing them up, quite honestly, to think about creating competitive advantage, I think it's right to therefore say that with humans unleashed, that new things, new innovative ideas are going to come to market. And as a consequence of that, there's going to be shifts. There's going to be new capabilities brought within existing organizations. And so perhaps there's a link there to some of those results.
Thank you. And Ian, your views on the poll?
Yeah, it's slightly higher than I thought in terms of those concerned about their business models being disrupted. But I think we've got an intelligent audience that they clearly can see some of the challenges. They've thought carefully about it. It's a difficult one to answer, isn't it? But I think it is about mindset. You know, if you accept that as the fact that 72%, let's just say, of sectors and companies are going to have their business models affected in a negative way by external organisations or new competitors, if that were to be true just for 1 second, you've got a choice. It's mindset. You can sit there and go, oh, this is terrible, it's so unfair, you know, or you can say, hang on a minute, how do we embrace this? How do we become a disruptor? How do we change ourselves such that we're on the side of those who are going to be here in 10 years, 20 years' time, rather than those who are just praying to God that this nasty technology goes away?
Love it. Right, it's time to answer your questions in our Q&A. I'm loving our first one. I'm going to ask Victoria to help here. The first question we got, how do we know that this is the real Anna and not an AI deep fake? Victoria, do you want to pinch me?
Yes, I was about to say that she's real.
There you go.
She goes, ow, make you jump.
Ow.
Yeah.
Definitely real. Pleased to confirm that. Victoria, we're going to stay with you. So we've got some interesting questions, people wanting to know more about you and your business. So can Victoria give us more detail about how the AI works to identify leaks?
Yeah. Okay, so if you can imagine a pipe that has water flowing down it, and that water normally flows at a constant speed if everything's working fine. And then it'll change in speed and noise if it's being used, somebody's drawing a tap, or if we make it through to the final of the World Cup and it's half time, we all put the kettle on, we're running more water. The patterns change, the noise changes, and it's acoustics. And actually, I'm a failed musician. Right? My mother, I'm actually a pianist, and my mother thinks I should be playing Rachmaninoff's piano concerto at the Royal Albert Hall, but I'm not. I'm here. I'm doing something far more important, which is trying to help the world not run out of water by using acoustics. So all water travelling down a pipe makes a noise, but also leaks make a noise, and they have something called acoustic propagation, depending on the environment that it's in, what size of pipe, what pipe material, whether it's a small, a medium or a large leak. And 90% of leaks never show above ground. So when you see and you're tutting, and rightly so, you're tutting, you see a mains burst, that's nothing compared to what we're losing beneath ground. So what our AI does is we either give away, it's like the Sky concept, we charge for content, not for the hardware. 3 little sensors that sit anywhere on the network, even at your home. And it's like an old-fashioned, if you're as old as me, Sony Walkman, right? It's a completely dumb device. My head of engineering hates me because I call him the head of dumb devices, and he's not, he's a genius. And it's there to just record and listen to everything. And then the AI takes that noise from either our sensors, which we give away for free, so developing world can take advantage, or if you've already got sensors on your network, they have a lot in the UK, they're very far advanced in the UK, we take those audio files and the AI goes, right, it's a leak, or it's not a leak. So humans don't have to sit and listen to that audio and imagine, and then we tell you the size of the leak, and then we can tell you where the location of that leak is. And then the important bit, we make sure it's been repaired properly. So your road is not going to be dug up 6 times for a small leak, it's going to be dug up once for a large leak, and we're going to verify it's been repaired, and we can see how much water we're going to save. And that can happen anywhere the world over. And as we learn more about individual networks, we can start to tell you where is the next leak likely to occur. I won't call it predictive analysis, that's snake oil, and anybody has a business model that says, pay me £1 million a year and I'll tell you what's going to happen in 10 years' time. Well, that's a great business model, but you get your money back. So we then learn about networks, so we know what's going to happen next. We then learn about the asset conditioning, because I know people are talking about sewers and the sewage outflow. And I do feel sorry for the UK utility companies, water companies. They present their business plans to Ofwat, and they try all this new technology, and they try ours in anger, and they've really tried. But the regulation here is in 5-year short time frames. They're given money and rewards for innovating, but absolutely no help or reward for adoption. So actually AI like ours, which can, and we're working here where we're sitting in Thames, and they're a great forward-thinking company. We're in most of the UK utility companies and in 5 continents, is we make sure it's available for everybody, using acoustics, analysing the acoustics to tell you if it's a leak and the type of the leak and the size anywhere in the world. And that's that leave no one behind. And that's the power of good AI. It's delivering something that we as a human race can't possibly do in time or with accuracy.
It's a truly wonderful example. Second question from our audience for you, Victoria. Are you gaining traction from working with the water companies and their regulators as a sharing community, not only with individual organisations? And is this working or not, and why?
Well, it's not working. Yes, we do work with water companies. Outside the UK, it's much easier. The UK water companies, I feel they're in a straitjacket. So they have their own areas which they have their own clients, and people call that a monopoly, yet they are told by Ofwat to compete with each other. There is a competition league like the Premier League, and they get points for innovation, but they get points for customer service, customer minutes lost. Innovation, you need to share. How can they possibly share? They try and share, but they've still got the back of their mind this league table. They then put these 5-year business plans in. It's all about leakage this AMP period till 2024. The next AMP period, it's going to be about carbon emissions, right? The best way the water industry can do is to protect our most precious resource, do it more effectively. By doing that, they'll be operating less. So the water companies are trying, but the regulators are absolutely, I know they have to hold them to account, but they're getting in the way of allowing them to go at scale, to invest in the right way, to make sure that this happens. So let's talk about sewage. We don't get involved in sewage, but very effective Surfers Against Sewage. Love the app. Believe in community agency. Absolutely the way forward to learn about water. And every time the surfers went out, they put a red cross and the head of Environment Agency had to act. What we've failed to do as an industry is say, but in order to fix that problem, we need massive investments because we only have a one sewer network. It takes away stormwater, rainwater and sewage. Right? A lot of other countries have too. Now, if we want to solve it, we've got to look at how we can do that and through new technology. So the water companies are trying. Some of the workforce may be frightened with AI and new technology losing their jobs. That doesn't happen. It gives them the tool, doesn't drive the car for them, not yet. It doesn't drive the car, it gives them the right information to actually do that. So we're getting some great traction, much easier to adopt because there's less regulation in terms of, not terms of data, that's absolutely critical. It's always the water company's data. We just process and give that data back. We don't hold the data, we don't own the data. It's not ours, it's actually the community's. It's their water, it's their life. So water companies are trying, but here in the UK, I would appeal to Ofwat to rethink the straitjacket that it's put them in. And then they can truly be held to account about the state of the service they're providing.
Thank you. So a really clear call from you for the regulator to allow companies to work together to decide how best to use AI going forward to solve our huge problems.
To encourage and to allow them to fail. We're allowed to fail in innovation, right? That's acceptable. You're not allowed to fail in adoption. And until we change that mindset that you will always still fail because they're doing their day job to 100%, to put new technology in requires operational change. They do not have time or the reward or the framework to do that with real effectiveness when they're dealing with the critical infrastructure. And that's why working with people like other corporations like Microsoft and Thames to try and bring all that together is really powerful. But the regulator has to give them that framework, give them the incentive, and give them the ability to fail and learn and share openly. And yes, that's my message to the UK regulators.
Thanks, Victoria. That's really clear. I'm going to take us in a different direction now, and a question I think will come to Nick first, and then Ian and Henry. Should businesses be worried about giving relatively free access to generative AI for staff to find ways to be personally productive in their day-to-day job? A great question from our audience there. Nick?
I mean, this is no different to should sensitive company information be shared outside of the organisation. And I'm sure every single CISO on this call today and in every organisation around the country would say no. And so there is obviously the risk of a shadow IT environment, much like we've seen with messaging applications as well, where people have just taken consumer technology and used it for business use. So I think there needs to be a conversation within organisations as to what is appropriate and applicable to be shared outside of an organisation, and what tools to use, but equally to evaluate some of the technology that is coming and that will help to mitigate against that potential risk. So it's a good conversation for leaders and boards to be having right now.
Thank you, Nick. Ian, Henry, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a moment to pause, isn't it, and reflect. So and I know we did this as KPMG, just took a moment to say, hang on a minute, we need to check this out and make sure it's appropriate that we can use it, and then put some guidelines around it, some bumpers around it. You know, as Nick alludes to, you can't put client confidential data into this in an open environment and play around with it. There's some pretty obvious things that you should not be doing. But just take a deep breath, have a look at it, assess it. You mentioned CISOs to check it out and so forth. And then again, give staff some guidance. But I think it's still a force for good as long as you have those bumpers around and rules around it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I might just add that I think the crowdsourcing example you gave earlier, Ian, is a helpful suggestion because people are most familiar with how they carry out their day job, right? So empowering staff to think of different ways in which they could perform their role more effectively, more efficiently, trying to seek ideas from your team members is a way of empowering staff and ultimately being more productive, but obviously with the guardrails that you just described being embedded into that process.
Thank you. And come back to you, Ian. You mentioned KPMG, and we've had a question in, what role does AI play in the professional services sector?
Well, again, it comes back to being able to take away some of the more mundane tasks so that our people and those in other areas of professional services can do the fulfilling, more exciting roles and so forth. A friend of mine is a CEO that runs a digital ad agency, and he's had to reskill a number of people because they'll go into client meetings and say, right, we've come up with X, Y, and Z. This is the thought around it, what we're going to do for you. And the client will say, I've just checked on ChatGPT and here's the actual answer. So they have to augment and enhance and improve what they can get from ChatGPT or Google Bard or wherever else. And so the roles are much more, as I say, about augmentation of the data that's out there rather than starting from scratch. So lots of opportunities to do things better, faster and more efficiently.
Victoria?
Yeah, I just want to comment on that. We just need to be careful. We talk about maybe polarisation, but the AI is fallible. And we should be very open about that. It is fallible. It's learnt from data that originally came from humans. And any AI that company that uses AI would be happy to share their stats on false positives and false negatives and understand that. And we need to take it in that advance, is that they don't get it right, AI, all the time. It is constantly learning, but just remember it is a tool as an aid to actually help us accelerate, to help solve some of the biggest challenges we face alongside the mundane.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. And I come back to new jobs that are being created. I'm told that prompt engineers is a new role, paid very well actually, to help teach the AI because it will make mistakes. Exactly to your point, it's scraping information from a huge amount of data. And again, as you said, some of that data is not accurate. It's put in by humans and maybe mistaken.
So I think you're both going to agree on with this question that we've had in. Lots of commentators in the media appear to be polarising AI from it being something that will change the world as we know it for good, and those who see it as the rise of the robots. Is there a middle ground where AI just kind of slots into what we're already doing? Ian, is that what you're saying?
Have you got any easier questions? Good question on different ones, please. It's much more straightforward. This is a really interesting area. Taking a slightly different direction. When I was 12 years old, my father bought me a ZX 81, the home computer. Didn't do a lot to be honest, but I wanted an Atari really. And then a ZX Spectrum. And he taught me about it's 8 bits in a byte and how to program BASIC. And it's just, it's ones and zeros, right? It's ones and zeros. That's all computing is, he explained. I'm obviously not getting onto quantum just yet. And so I did find it quite strange recently, reading in newspapers about the end of civilization and all the Hollywood blockbuster films that are going to come true if it's just ones and zeros. But I think it's important to realise that there are a number of very experienced, very senior people in big tech who've come out recently and said, I don't really quite understand how it works, or I'm a little bit concerned about it. And so when you have people at that level, with that level of knowledge expressing their concern, perhaps it is time just to take a step back, just a little bit of a pause.
Thank you. And a great question here, maybe easier, Ian, I can't promise that. I think we'll ask everyone on our panel this. What would you like to see the government do to help accelerate AI and tech in the UK? Henry, maybe if we come to you first for your thoughts.
Sure. So I think in FS, what's been really successful is the role of regulatory sandboxes. And so giving innovators some space to freely test their products, test the outcomes and what the limitations might be associated with embedding certain safeguards within them. I think providing them with that freedom to really innovate in a safe environment without being subject to the types of regulations or risks that we previously discussed will help them develop better products that ultimately engender trust, consumer trust, and then hopefully help us roll out generative AI and other forms of AI in a much safer and more effective way.
Thank you. Ian, what would you like to see the government do?
Well, so there's a long list I've got, which I haven't got time to go through, I'm afraid. But and the government are doing some good things. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying there are additional things that could be done. But for us to maintain our position on the world stage, we're a pretty small island if we're on about it, right? We're a pretty small island. We need to be good at this stuff. We need to be a centre for quantum technologies, possibly metaverse, generative AI. So the government must invest in it. But if I have one thing, if you ask me one thing, it will be about digital skills. Really getting that work with our young people as they come through schools with the knowledge, the ability, the hunger, the interest in these kind of emerging technologies so we can be a world leader on the stage.
I love that. And it's National Numeracy Day today. We've got hundreds of primary school kids in our building focusing on maths, the digital people of the future, no doubt.
Exactly.
Victoria, one thing government should do?
There's lots maybe that the government should do. I think one thing they should remove is investment for startups can often be tortuous. We all sit in a data room for 6 months and we get that data room eyes syndrome. You get over that hurdle, you get to the final hurdle and you have to register with the NSIA Investment Act, which if you've got global investors and we're looking for global investment and they all have a deal pipeline funnel. And if we're making to invest in a UK business just that too high to jump and they can go somewhere else, it's not, some of it is completely not relevant and is a blocker. And I think what the government has to do is to make sure that to encourage new technology at pace, you will only do it and will only solve this water crisis, scarcity in the world, by creating unconventional partnerships, which is what we've done with some big corporations like water companies and with Microsoft and others, to actually bring different areas of expertise, be brave enough to know what we don't know, get in the expertise, government to encourage that, not block it, to be able to come something that makes sure we stay at the leading forefront, because very quickly we're going to lose that position and investment will dry up as a result.
Thank you. And Nick, coming to you, your one ask of government, what would that be?
Well, I align with Ian's point, really. I'd broaden it out from just AI and talk about the skills gap. At Microsoft, we're committed to supporting government with 1.5 million new skilled up workers by 2025, and we're well into that journey with government and supporting government. But I would say that there is still a huge opportunity, quite honestly, especially in the world of citizen developers and building new applications, building new process flows. There is a clear skill shortage there, and also a great opportunity as you think about reskilling, retraining, and moving into new careers and progression within your own career. So that's a wonderful opportunity, and we would love to continue to work with both government and private sector companies to help with that, quite honestly.
Thank you. I've got one last question. I'm going to come to you first, Nick. Would you rather talk to a chatbot or a real person, and why, Nick?
Wow. My best friend is my wife, and I'd much rather talk to her.
How diplomatic. Henry?
Likewise, a person. So far, my experience has been that I prefer speaking to people than chat boxes, but hopefully with the rise of generative AI, that will soon change.
Oh, and I'm wondering if we're going to get a change as we move down the sofa. Ian?
Actually, a chatbot. I've had some shock horror, some amazing experiences where they've just solved the problem very quickly. And I would have had to wait 20 minutes to get through to a person, and it's been solved by the chatbot in 60 seconds.
Victoria?
If we can use AI to get rid of that phrase, your call is important to us, but we're experiencing high levels of volume at the moment. That is a thing to be wondered. But ultimately, we are a species that relies on contact. So AI can definitely help, but when push comes to shove, it's human-to-human contact.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for all your questions. We've not been able to cover them all. We're out of time for today. But what have we learned? First of all, I'd say AI is here to stay, so we can't ignore it or afford to fall behind. Plan and explore how you're going to benefit from it. Second, I'd say think through how you can use partnerships to access AI faster and accelerate innovation. And third, whilst the UK may be taking a light touch approach to regulating, given we're operating in a connected world, we need to keep a close eye on what's happening elsewhere. Well, it just remains for me to say a big thank you to our guests today, Victoria, Nick, Ian and Henry, thank you so much. Do please visit the resources tab for all our latest insights, content and events. That includes thought leadership on generative AI and details of our 2023 UK Tech Innovator of the Year competition. You could be the next Victoria if you want to enter, and you've got until the end of the week to do that. But it's worth anyone taking a look at it for an insight into some of the most innovative companies in the UK at the moment. We've got plenty. So thanks for joining us today. We'll be back in June when we'll be talking about ESG. See you then.